Welcome to the TYS Podcast. I'm Sri Gopinath, Vice President of Customer Success, Delivery, and Professional Services here at Trusted Supplier. And today I'm excited to introduce our esteemed guest, Dr. Elouise Epstein. Just by way of introduction, Dr. Epstein is a digital futurist and a Kearney partner based in San Francisco. She has over 25 years working as a trusted advisor, working with clients to develop digital procurement and supply chain strategies. She is the author of three books, creator of the YouTube series Gen Xers versus Gen AI, and co host of the weekly podcast Dual Sourced Discourse. Links to these will be provided in the description box below. Dr. Elouise Epstein, welcome to the show and the podcast. It's an honor to have you join us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for your time today. We are really excited to have you here, and especially after having come back from two major events that you attended recently, DPW Amsterdam and another digital garage event hosted by BT Sourced, which is one of TYS's key customers. So I'd like to start us off by asking you, what are some of the trends you saw there in procurement as we are getting closer to wrapping up 2024?
Yeah, there was certainly, I think there was over 100 exhibitors there. So
Mhm.
the procure tech space is alive and well. There has been contraction. There will be more, but innovation is, I would say, off the charts. And excitement and enthusiasm. And that, of course, is, I think everybody by now knows that that to me is a reaction to the previous generation of single provider tools that failed miserably to deliver. And they have actually failed to evolve. So certainly a lot of innovation. And so that's one trend, or the innovation continues. Another trend also is dealing with the complexity, and that has certainly bubbled up. That's not a new issue, but certainly trying to harness the complexity is really the probably the number one challenge I heard. And then the third one, of course, is just the the fire hose of AI and everybody trying to figure out what to do with it. And my colleague Shaquille Nathu at Kearney came up or had it ran a survey earlier this year, and in the survey it showed 96% of procurement leaders plan to build something versus buy. Now that doesn't get into all the is it going to build a small thing or a whole thing, but I do think that's an interesting trend. You're going to start to see more build or some measure of build in addition to buy.
That's fantastic. I'm sure we'll be digging in a little bit into the AI subject later on in the podcast. I also, before we kind of come back from your debrief on your recent trips, I just also wanted to talk to you about BT because BT is a key customer for us, and I feel like they have played a huge role in ensuring TOIS's success going forward. Could you comment on what your observations were on BT's approach to building up their procurement tech ecosystem?
I'm a longtime fan of BT, and I did a case study that on them in my second book, especially the origins of BT sourced and how they really came to be this juggernaut of tech adoption. So I admire them greatly and remain a big fan. The fact that they have a whole week dedicated to upskilling, uplifting the whole organization around this, and they're so public about it, is I think it's a great sign for the health of the profession and for them as a company.
Oh, that's great to hear because I also get the impression that they make digital a centerpiece of how they work on their procurement processes and drive this into their way of working into the organization. And that's really great to see they're making these events more visible and engaging with the whole organization. So that's a great validation. Thank you. So now look forward to 2025. So I think again coming back from these events, you do a lot of surveys and talk to a lot of clients. What are some of the strategies and technologies you believe will shape procurement next year and beyond? Let's go from there and maybe we dig into the AI, which is really exploding.
Sure. The real main thing takeaway, if we set AI aside for a second,
Yeah.
is is that most everybody agrees that quote unquote digital transformations are a failure, and they have yet to drive the benefits or success or even change that is promised. So at this point, I don't think anybody's laboring under the delusion that digital transformations are really where it's at, because as I would argue, most digital transformations are just ERP upgrades in disguise. So with that as the background, that leaves that's a lot of money spent on a lot of effort that doesn't improve the day to day of how we work. And that's why I love what BT Source has done is they're doing it despite all of the traditional challenges with digital transformation. So I think when we go into 2025, I think everybody's eyes are open. They're not just wholesale buying the suite. If they're upgrading, they're doing minimal amounts. And a trend that's been underway for a number of years is rolling back. If you've bought 6 modules of the suite, you're now rolling back and removing two, three, four of them. So that trend will continue in 2025, and ideally, though, we'll still keep adding, layering on some of these point solutions, and hopefully the integrations will get easier, get faster, et cetera, et cetera. However, that said, I also think the complexity of all this procure tech is going to morph into new platforms. And what we're really lacking is a procurement platform. And I think a number of providers are recognize that and are building that, have built it, are expanding that. So I think in 25, we're going to see a lot more of those new platforms take shape, and that will cause a cascade effect. I don't know exactly what that is, but certainly as we get essentially these will be the platforms that replace the legacy platforms. They're not there yet, but that path is clear. And then, of course, I mean, we can't like take two steps without saying AI. And there's a lot of AI fatigue, but at the same time, there's also a lot of AI progress. And so that's what I'm trying to get people to understand is you got to hold both ideas at the same time. And so I think probably the biggest challenge on that front is most organizations have some AI platform through AWS or Azure or Google.
Yeah.
Where they struggle is the people. And so I think if I were to make a prediction, 25 will be much more focused on the people.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great overview. I heard a few things, right? One is pretty strong statement. He's saying digital transformations are failure most of the time. The other things is the modularization and how companies are starting to incorporate digital tools into their procurement space. Now, do you feel like companies are learning this by trial and error, or are there certain things that companies are learning and very clearly shaping their priorities for next year? I mean, how deliberately is this knowledge transfer happening, and or is it mostly navigating through a fog of AI and technology and figuring out what works for them?
Everybody is running into challenges, tripping over somebody left
Yeah,
chairs turned over and people are tripping over them. And there's banana peels and golf balls and Legos all over the floor. So digital is hard. While
yeah,
the end result might be amazing, it is hard to get to the end result. And I mean, the iPhone or the Alexa device or even Google Gmail, like these take years, even decades to get right. So sometimes we forget about the pain to get to the outcome. Early versions of the iPhone were stellar at the time, but would seem silly today. And yet it was a breakthrough technology. And and we forget, and I'm sure the prototypes were even worse. But but we forget all that because like our lives have become so embedded into these devices, and we've developed, dare I say, emotional attachments to them. It's hard to leave the house, or it's hard to walk down the street without pulling out your phone every 30 seconds. So, so but it's messy until you get to that point. And we often want the magic button. And for the most part, the magic button doesn't exist. And even if it does exist, you still have to do work to make the magic button work, or to make it go smoothly. So that's a little bit of what we forget. And that's on one hand. And then the other is that where I think we differ from years past is everybody used to hide behind this best practices. And that used to be the domain of systems integrators and consultants because they would go around talking privately, whispering. And then I'd go to you and so and so. And now, and I think there was fear, I think there was sort of information hoarding, but now one of the things I love about DPW is everybody gets up on stage and talks about their pain points and their failures, and that's good, that's healthy, and because that's how we learn. And it's how we learn as individuals, but also if you get up on stage, the audience starts to learn and appreciate, you know what, I'm not alone. And so we've shown the light on how hard this is. And I think that has huge long-term benefits.
Yeah, that's great. I think talking about things like the iPhone example you just mentioned, I was in the business in mobility at Motorola and remember launching the Razr phone at that time, and we believed Apple couldn't touch us, and that was a huge strategic mistake. I believe in one of the things Apple got right was the customer experience, and I'm seeing the same thing with the end user experience in procurement tech, having led many digital transformations before, is it's not about the functionality of the tool, but really are you delivering the right user experience to embed these tools into their way of working, that this is a better life with the tool than without it. And to me, that's the biggest lesson learned, and companies are still figuring out how to deliver that instead of packaging everything in the kitchen sink into the toolbox and hoping it works. So it's something that I think we as procurement technology companies have to understand better how to deliver that compelling user experience. So that's a big lesson from Apple. I think we can all learn from. And I love your comment about everyone sharing and learning together, and that's exactly how the industry can become a better ecosystem, collaborating between solution providers and companies. So thank you for that. So I think we talked a little bit about AI. So let's kind of dive a little bit into how do you see AI as predicting likely scenarios? I mean, procurement, strategically speaking, is all about what might happen. It's not just about reducing cost anymore. So how do you see AI predicting likely scenarios, and where are some of the use cases you feel it'll take off really well?
So I don't buy into the concept, and I'm willing to be wrong. So, mark the tape because we can go back. But I don't believe AI can predict black swan events or even gray swan events. That's our job, is to sort of look at some of these bigger trends of what's happening, and it irritates me to open up LinkedIn and see everybody commenting on the issues in the Red Sea, or the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war, or the whatever, fill in the blank crisis, the hurricane here in the U.S. Like, we are just going to continually go from one crisis to the next. What I feel like we have to do as procurement is, if we're going to predict stuff, is we have to take a step back and really understand the context of the world we live in. And one of the things that's very well afoot is deglobalization. That's not something you can feed into a model and predict the next. Like, deglobalization is a destabilizing event. And you could pair that with looking at the inability of the UN or the UN's difficulty to pivot to the world that we live in today. It's still dealing with a post-World War II world. And so like those are the precursors to black swan events and understanding gray swan events. So I really like I'm not a big fan of risk tools for that very reason, because some of the things that we're dealing with, like you have to look at them in aggregate and sort of understand. And to do that, I'm not saying AI won't help that. I'm not saying that AI is bad. It's just I'd rather have AI automate all the nonsense so that we can just spend our time uh, mapping out, visualizing what could happen.
Very well put. I think AI is a valuable assistant to help you make the right decisions, not do it for you. So I totally get that. So we are kind of in that space, technology space, and one of the things TYS centers its product concept around is the supplier digital wallet that enables suppliers to, take consistent, shareable information in a secure way from one customer to another. How do you see the supplier digital wallet concept as a passport for the future for the supplier community?
I'm a huge believer in the digital wallet. Now, I'm going to take a step back again, sort of this macro view on this. I believe that our data as individuals is a human right. So when I walk into a room, when I leave the room, there's data that follows me into the room. There's data that I leave behind when I walk out of the room. That is my data. That's part of my being. And I believe this. And I think over time we will come to appreciate and hopefully legislate or somehow otherwise capture that so that I can profit on that, or I if I choose to, but at a minimum that is I can secure that data. That's just my philosophy more broadly. And I would and the fact that social media, e-commerce, everybody, the government is taking our data without our permission, to me is unacceptable. And and so if all of that is true, then then it stands to reason that businesses, the same is true for them. Like if Fortune 500 company, if I go work for them for 6 months, as a supplier and I give them my data, I want it back when I'm done. I don't want them to have it in perpetuity to, uh, uh, to mine that data. And, or maybe I do, but that should be my choice. But worse is I don't want a source to pay provider or other third party provider to take that data and use it to build out supplier networks that they can sell to the client I'm working for and to use it to find more business. So philosophically, to me, the digital wallet is the technical solve to that problem.
So I think kind of expanding on that concept a little further, adoption is growing. From our standpoint, we see it, but it's a little slow and usually happens when the buying company is insisting that suppliers do it. How can we as TYS, with this solution, motivate suppliers to accelerate adoption, in your view?
It's a good question. It's early, and I like to joke with TYS's founder Sai that it's the right technology but it's early. Like you've built it before the market has wrapped their head around it. We're still struggling with yesterday's problems, and you have tomorrow's solution. So it's a heavy lift to get people there. But once you can start to get people there, it starts to change the dialogue, and people can see, and of course, the benefit as a supplier is back to my example. If I'm serving some Fortune 100 company or Fortune 500 company, if I can if I can use the wallet share my information, get it back. But then I assign another client and I can just, and their TYS, they'll read my TYS wallet. I can push it out to them. And that that's a benefit to me as a supplier because I can maintain my wallet, much like I maintain my LinkedIn profile, because
Right.
I want it's a representation of me. And just like the wallet, there's a benefit to it of having the wallet, and I can just, save myself a lot of administrative headache. But we're just like a moment too soon in the adoption, and what you're experiencing is that early, or first mover disadvantage, I would say, of
Yeah.
you have to get the market ready to use the tool that you've developed.
Understand. So I think it kind of in parallel to that, I'm looking at the spider diagram that you publish regularly. And in your view, I just wanted to talk about, there's so many companies out there offering solutions, right? So first of all, why are there so many? What's the benefit of being in it? And who, in your opinion, is the best tech provider because they have certain attributes that makes them a leader, right? So what does it mean to kind of get published on the diagram, and what are your expectations on that? So,
Well, fundamentally, so it's really an innovation map, and I can't remember if I've changed the title or promised to change the title,
okay.
but again, it comes out of a extreme dissatisfaction with the status quo from years ago. So
Mhm.
now it's become that reaction, and it's too complicated. I make that slide deliberately complicated. However, what's important on the slide is the labels. So I have these labels that identify the one thing that I believe this company does really well, and I validate it um, with clients, and also I talk to the founders. There is the reason it exists is the reason that there's so much money in the procure tech space in terms of investment, because procurement adds value, and if and there's not a lot happening in sales and marketing tools, so might as well invest in supply chain and procurement specifically. So there's a lot of money, there's a lot of hype, and folks need help demystifying all of these hundreds, if not thousands, of company or startups. And that's very alive and well when you walk through DPW. You see a lot of it. But remember, and I'll say this till I'm blue in the face, this is just a way station. The spider map is just a pivot into what comes next. And what comes next is more around orchestration. It's around let's call it an AI agent workforce, and sort of how those things interact. Those will become the next generation platforms because, and I'll just make this point, we have overcomplicated what procurement could be and should be under the guise of best practices. But in reality, we can operate procurement much more lean, efficient, and we don't need these big, heavy systems. And until we start to make that pivot, which I think we're starting to, and we see it at the mid market very much so, then we will, well, it's just the journey we're on.
Let's spend a little time talking about global trade and conflicts. You talked about scenarios and how we need to, uh, you know, us spending time and understanding and dealing with it. So, as you mentioned, Ukraine, Israel, all these conflicts are into the second and third years. And what should we be planning for as these situations evolve? And how do you work with suppliers and service providers from these conflicted regions to manage our supply chains?
Well, there's also other hotspots in the Middle East. Yemen's been in a civil war for quite a number of years now.
Right.
You have various hotspots in Africa and South America,
Mhm.
and we now have contested uh, territories up in the Arctic. So we just get a steady diet of what's going on in Ukraine and Israel, and to be sure, those are awful situations. part of the reason those are so disruptive to our supply chains is going back to the late 90s and then eventually I think it was 2000 when Thomas Friedman's book The World is Flat. Like
Mhm.
I suspect you came of age in the business world when let's 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 flatten business in and we will send our manufacturing to far-flung places.
Yeah.
We will gather raw materials from far-flung places and we'll just ship it all back and forth. And we've gotten really
Yeah.
good at that, like getting massive container ships and like goods can in peaceful times can move very quickly and efficiently, and our supply chains got very extended. And that's really what I like wrote about in my last book is that we have to get beyond this idea. Like we can't, well, you can do far-flung extended global supply chains, but that does not give you risk or resiliency. And you become at the whim of changing politics, the wars that pop out, or even just the Panama Canal or the other one, the Suez Canal, where like the ship gets stuck, or the Panama Canal where they sort of don't have enough water to get the ships through.
Right.
Like these things are always going to happen when you are relying on so many pieces. Whereas if you and I start a business and we have a factory down the street, well, that's a lot easier to control because we're not the whims of global politics. We're just at the whims of random events like an earthquake or something local. But and so that's it's a little bit of this tension. And until we and so, with that as the background, if we take all, like we start, okay, well, we don't want all these global supply chains. Let's bring them onshore, near shore, friend shore, all these other things. Well, what does that do? That starts to leave, it starts to leave gaps in the global fabric. All of a sudden, do you thrust these countries that you leave into chaos? What happens when you just pull all this stuff out? And and you see this a little bit with the Somali pirates back in was it 2010
Yeah.
around the 2010s. That, there was a reason that the pirates, which not I'm not condoning, but the understanding that the reason piracy grew is because the traditional methods of sustaining themselves were taken away by other means. I don't want to get anybody in trouble here, but they had no other choice because their livelihoods had been impinged upon. And so all of these sort of for the greater good business efforts do have impacts over time.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you for connecting the dots on all that because I also lived through my share of crises with the fiscal crisis in automotive and many years ago, the Japan earthquake that disrupted all the semiconductors and the EMSs. So the list goes on to your point. So these things will continue to happen, and we need to be ready. But then there are other things that are geopolitical, in terms of trade policy. Like, for example, in China, where things are evolving in a certain direction and we can plan for it more deliberately. So what could you comment on something there that can be anticipated and we can take preventive action instead of corrective action when like an earthquake or something like that? So
We have to be careful that, like, we can't predict a lot of this stuff. And more to the point, we have to expect it. And so I would just put us back to the fundamentals. And part of the reason these disruptions are so painful is because we don't have the underlying data to absorb or plan or prepare. And so if you go back to the trade wars in 2017, 2018, like that was not a surprise. They just nobody wanted to believe it. And
yeah,
when they were enacted, everybody scrambled. But what are all the pieces of the device that are, I have a camera, I'm speaking into a camera. Like what parts of this are from China, are manufactured in China,
right.
et cetera, et cetera. Like it was a crash effort to figure that out for thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of products.
Hmm.
So if we know all of that in advance, then we can, and we believe when we say, when China's leader says something, or our president in the US or wherever say something, or it looks like the UK is going to exit the European Union, we actually have to plan that in advance. Those are not black swan events. Like we know those, to your point, those are coming, but we just choose not to react to them proactively because we don't want to spend the time or effort or money.
Yeah, I think this goes towards the point of you have to have enough resiliency in your supply chain that when they do happen or move in a certain direction you were anticipating, you can be better prepared, right? So that's really the bottom line there. So
And so what does that mean? You need to know what the products are, what the different materials are, where they come from, and of course who your suppliers are. And it's all interlinked together. And you have to know where your suppliers are and where their manufacturing plants are and all of this stuff. And you go back to the digital wallet, that will go a long way because if let's say I start my own contract manufacturer and business, and I put one in Peru and I put one in Indonesia and I don't know, Alaska. Well, if you want to use my contract manufacturing services, you want to know where my plants are, what shipping rates I have in and out, what all these logistics things. Well, I might be willing to give you them in my wallet if and I'll give you all of that information, which is really what you need. But there again, there has to be a benefit. I can't do it just because you beat me over the head with a stick. Like that's like no, that's not. I would argue that's not modern business. That's not going to sustain. That's an old way of operating.
just wanted to touch on two more things, Elouise. I think one is when we're talking about pivoting and building resiliency and all that, it automatically leads into, okay, how can I discover suppliers? I mean, digital wallet promotes that, of course, but what is the opportunity for suppliers to grow their business and help large enterprises mitigate the risks that we are talking about?
Well, supplier identity and supplier discovery are different. Supplier identity is part of relationship management. We call it whatever we want, but it's an ability to transact with a supplier. So ultimately, you need my banking information because I want you to pay me. Ultimately, I want to know how I'm performing. I want you to know my capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. But supplier discovery is a whole different ball game because it is looking at the totality of the world and often non-English speaking world to understand what capabilities suppliers have in various regions. And so that's a scale proposition. And you can choose to do that. And there are companies that are good at that. And you can build it, you can buy slash partner for that. But understanding that the two are vastly different, I'm going to say ideologies. I can't think of the right word, but you're never going to scale getting everybody's information about banking and like the transactional information. And back to our point about risk, you're never going to get all of that information at scale. Well, we won't see that for a number of years. So
I think finally we come to the topic of regulations. I mean, these regulations are evolving. There's new regulations coming up. Thinking about, deforestation regulations in Europe, things like conflict minerals in conflicted regions. So companies need to be compliant there in order to avoid getting into trouble with the regulatory authorities. How can somebody like a TYS, for example, in your opinion, what can we do to help these companies address regulatory needs? How do we keep in track of, all these new things that are coming up? Because procurement organizations are not necessarily paying attention to what's changing. Suddenly they see a new rule come up and now they got to scramble and figure out how you're going to meet that requirement. So how do you see, us, the technology or solution providers, playing a role in facilitating that awareness?
Well, first I want to make a macro point on that because while the EU has done a really good job of enacting laws and tightening some and strengthening, even China has done it. They have, especially when it comes to online activity and privacy and algorithmic control or algorithmic adherence and uh, sort of governance of these newer technologies. In the US, we seem hell bent on going the other direction. And so like DEI is is a well, let's say call it a three-letter word right now, and there's a huge backlash against it. And there's a backlash and an intransigence of doing climate-related efforts and a sort of unwillingness to look at the broader context. Now, I'm not making a judgment. Everybody can make the judgment, their own judgment. What I'm pointing out is that we can't just take it as fact that everybody is that we're on this march towards regulatory nirvana. Uh, but it makes it hard for a multinational company to be operating in Europe and in the US. Because on one hand, you got to get much tighter on regulatory adherence in the EU, and here you got to do what was it Tractor Supply and Harley Davidson, where you start to like actually promote that you're not adhering to certain not regulations necessarily, but certain ways of operating. So I think I just want
Yeah.
to flag that because too often I hear regulatory compliance as this hammer, but when you sit here in the US, it's like, well, not so fast. We have we're not all on the same page here. Let's just say that. Now, what TYS can do, and this gets back to the other idea, is like if I know I have to be GDPR compliant or conflict mineral compliant or whatever, that should be part of my digital wallet. So you want to know that, and you come to me, or Fortune 500 company comes to me, and we're transacting, and then someday they're like, I need to know that you're not doing forced labor or something like that. I say, oh yeah, I just go to my wallet. It's right here. It's in the wallet. In fact, actually, you could probably just query my wallet without even asking me because it's there. Or and I'm just sort of off the top of my head, as you go to run a compliance report, it actually should just automatically query all the wallets that have that compliance already done. And you might find that 85% of your 90% of your suppliers are already sort of compliant on that thing. So it's just we didn't ask that question when we onboarded the supplier, but oh, guess what? It's in the wallet. So I think there is something. So two sort of quick points. I know that's a long answer. One is having the ability to do that in the wallet proactively, ideally, but also being able to show the buyer or whom the compliance folks in a way without them having to go ask the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're painting a very futuristic state of where I would love to see procurement go. As a practitioner, we get caught up too much in the habit of asking the supplier for everything and using our old ways to get that information. And we really need to shift our ways to how do we go to independent and validated ways so we don't waste our time collecting information. We focus on fundamental issues and move up the strategic roadmap. Well, Elouise, it's been a fascinating discussion. I'm sure we could keep talking about everything and solving world hunger here, but we do have a time limit, and I want to thank you for a very engaging and interesting discussion. So, and for those of you who are watching the podcast, we thank you for your time. And it's my honor again to moderate this session with Elouise. And thank you again. And we look forward to continuing the discussions in the future. Thank you for joining our series.
Thank you.